Temp check. What kind of summer are we having this year? A family road trip summer? A beach bum summer? Or a wake me up when the sun sets summer? With Instacart, choose your own adventure and skip the shopping side quests. Where available, you can get ice cream delivered to your hotel, sunscreen to the pool, or cold brew to your bed. Well, door, in as fast as 30 minutes. Wherever you find yourself this summer, you can get the goods. Download Instacart for free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum $10 per order. Excludes restaurants. Additional terms and fees apply.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
And each episode, our special guest or guests bring with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
I'm so excited because this week our guests are director Nate Dushku and writer Amnon Lourie, the minds behind the new queer erotic thriller Birder, which I'm sure you've seen me not being able to shut up about for the past couple of weeks. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you.
Yay.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. We're very excited to chat because I love erotic thrillers. I love gay shit. So put them together. My cat. So if you could kind of let our listeners know a little bit about the movie in case they're not familiar with it, although I don't know how if they've listened to the podcast before because, Mary Beth talks about it. But in case they don't, what is it about?
Birder is an erotic thriller, or we have been recently calling it a sex film, about a birdwatcher, Christian Brooks, who invades a nude queer campground on a remote lake in way off New Hampshire, and he basically becomes whatever he needs to be to lure these campers into his fetish. And he does that by gaining consent, and a lot of terrible things happen. It's a cautionary tale.
Yes.
Yeah, it really is. My immediate frame of mind going into this, though, was Stranger by the Lake, the French film. I'm curious, what was sort of like your inspiration to do Birder?
Well, Nate and I spend a decent amount of time going to places that are really beautiful. We enjoy nature. And we enjoy queer spaces where people can kind of be free and be naked and sexually free, whatever it is that they need in order to be themselves. And we kind of settled on an idea to do something a little along the lines of a gay thriller or mystery movie a few years ago when we were in this place called Rock River in Vermont. The pandemic hit, and our idea to do like Gay Clue was a little bit more difficult to pull off, so we decided to go this route. And we both grew up in the 80s, and it's like the heyday of these awesome sexual thrillers and like really terrible like misogyny kind of making it through movies in like sexual ways. Which, it's a thing. It's entertaining if you can see it for what it is, but it's also like weirdly indoctrinating and fascinating as entertainment. So we kind of wanted to do something that was a take on it.
Hell yeah.
Cool.
This is so specific, but how did you land on a birder? Because I have actually quite a few birders in my life, so it just always made me giggle. So because I think of, like, my grandparents love birding. So, like, how did birding become, like, his job,
We had a partner who's someone who we met out in the woods who was a friend and a very attractive man, and we were enjoying his company, and we were talking about what people do in the woods, and he was a birder, and we're like, oh, what a convenient way to meet other men in the woods.
Yeah, right. That's fair.
And-
That is actually a very convenient way.
Yeah,
All you
really
need to be a
is.
birder is just, be alone in the woods and stare at the sky.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah, and maybe a pair of binoculars if you're really trying to be convincing.
Yeah. I mean, at the beginning, we were like thinking about what would be like a money-making title, and we were like pause was part of it, like a bear and play off of Jaws, because there's that like sharky element to it where he's just being an animal, and there's a lot of the animal motif stuff. So, but then we're just like, it's a little derivative, and
we actually have lived by the Arnold Arboretum in Boston, and there's a giant species of birds, and our neighbor across the hall is a legit bird watcher. I mean, he's in the community known to be a bird watcher. So there are long walks that we took staring at the birds and, kind of feeling like just kind of like being this person or just being in the element that this person might be in, especially when you're up in New Hampshire with the loons everywhere and the noises. It's not hard to enjoy the birds.
Also, where we shot is like where on Golden Pond was shot, and the area is famous for like these birds, not just loons, but like
bald eagles. You're bound to run into one if you're up there for a few days.
And they're wild.
Big hawks.
They completely control the environment. They're talkative. They're curious. They're big. They're incredible animals.
Dang, cool.
Wow.
And they're predatory.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. And predatory.
There we go.
Well, Terry, I'll let you ask before we move on, because I've already talked to them. So if there's any
yes, I think one of my big questions. I love when movies are unabashedly sexy, and I love when they're unabashedly queer, particularly because I feel like we're in this time frame where there's a little bit of puritanicalness in terms of like sex, and like that is I don't know if it's outside of online, but online it seems to be a huge topic of conversation. And I'm just like, I want it. I grew up same as you. I was born in the 80s. All the erotic thrillers of the 90s were sort of like, as a closeted queer person, a very like liberating thing to watch things like Wild Things, or to watch, things where I could get a little bit of that male sexiness as opposed to just naked women in some of the misogynistic movies of the past. And so I'm curious. I don't even know what the question is exactly. I'm just like, I'm just thank you for
Terry,
making
I literally
I
asked you
feel
the
you.
same exact question, and it wasn't even a question. It was a comment about thanking them about gay. So we are the same, have the same one brain cell. So I love that for both of us.
I'm right there with you. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we did this, is because we, all that, growing up with that, and just, seeking it out and feeling like we're moving in that direction. And yes, things sometimes feel like we're moving away from that now. And I find it interesting when we read these articles, like, is there too much sex in movies? And like people weighing in and actually, saying that there potentially is, and me just feeling like that's wild. There's just not enough. Yeah. And so let's do something that's unabashedly queer. And it took a long time, I think, for us to come to this place where we've both been out for a long time, but I think doing something like this just kind of washed over us in that moment of, I think the pandemic probably did have a lot to do with it in a weird way, of just kind of like being around your people and just like, what do we do now? Let's just speak honestly.
And I would add on to it that, like we want to tell stories. We've been working together in the film and TV and entertainment business for a bit, and we want to tell stories that are important to us, and it feels like more and more today, where we find our freedom as like storytellers or just people in general is kind of shifting and maybe even shrinking as technology increases like the homogeneity of like the entire world. Like there's not a lot of spaces where you can escape into, and I think that the conversations that people have about identity are really important, and they're troublesome because, you can find yourself in your sexuality, but you can also lose yourself, and you can become part of communities that don't necessarily like help you to like be who you really are. And sex is a powerful thing, and it gives you pleasure, and it gives you fulfillment, and you can find partners and life partners or whatever it is that really like, there's a lot of hard shit in the world, and coming or like getting off is fucking great every once in a while, and finding people to do that with is important, but having conversations about it without being ashamed of it, because someone wrote a book a while ago and they were really good at marketing it, and then they turned it into a bunch of different cults and they were really good at marketing it, and now it's really big business. And it's really hard to have like just a simple conversation about sex or fucking or kink or whatever it is, because everyone's worried that they might offend or they might go to hell or whatever it is. So, I figure like we wanted to add to like, be like, if you want to talk about it, talk about it. If someone's going to come down on us or hate us or think we're talking about it poorly, who fucking cares?
And there's app culture, dating and sex culture, and how that just affected all of our lives. And then people deciding to, or queers, namely, going to this place where you're not with your phones, you're not with your apps, and you're just stripped down, and you're back to this face-to-face kind of unabashed sexuality, and how interesting that is. And, let's talk about it. Let's not pretend it's not the way it is.
Yeah. I think my other question is, because I was surprised, because when I went into this, I was thinking that it was mainly going to be gay men. And so there's a whole variety of sexualities on display here. And I'm just curious, was that something that started in the beginning, or how did you decide to make it as more open as opposed to just gay men in the woods?
I think that, it might be as simple as to say, like, some people go on the apps for a relationship and others go on to just fuck. And you find someone that you think you're attracted to, and then you meet them, and sometimes it just blows your expectations, or, and that could happen in person too, when you just get to know someone, you see the way they look. And then, we have, this introducing pronouns and, this conversations of gender versus sexuality. And, this is new to a lot of people. And so in our life back in Boston at the time where we were living, we have lots of different types of friends, and this is our community. And so from the very beginning, it was this kind of, we're not, the roles were written, a lot of them for blind casting, as they say, but I think we also didn't want to just say, oh, who's the best actor for the role? We definitely wanted to give an authentic representation of our community, which is full of people of different color, skin, and sexuality and gender. And so, it's tough because you're trying to also get people to agree to take their clothes off and and do all this simulated sex. But it was hard because we at times even felt like maybe we didn't quite go as, diverse as this buzzword, but we didn't want it to be, stunt casting. And, that's just the
United
trick.
Colors of Benetton.
Yeah, that's the trick. Is it all? Is it real and just the people that you meet, and,
I would add one thing on that, is that it is like the world of Birder it seems weird because people are like, this feels like it's like you're pulling from porn and you're making this world. Like, that place actually exists, and it exists in a lot of places around the world where like queer people come together, and they're like, there are people of different gender identities and different sexual identities. And, the last time we were at this like queer campsite, there was a female identifying trans person who was wearing a harness, who had like just huge breasts, and just like was like living it up with the boys. And there were, there were drag queens there. It just is what it is. It's like trying to convince someone that it exists. It's not really the purpose as much as just saying like, these places exist. There are queer people out there in the world who just kind of like, just want to be, and kind of want to be themselves in this community. And the point of the community is you can be whatever you want, so long as you're not toxic or harming or
shitty.
And sometimes you can be a little toxic and people will forgive you. It's like, it's just like the world is not, we're not just all one thing. We're all ourselves.
I mean, as someone that lives in the center of the country, the idea of Birder is such a wonderful idea for me. Because, like, you're talking about going to campgrounds, and I'm like, man, maybe I should look into doing that. Because, I mean, it's very homogenous here where I live, unfortunately. So
if you go a little further north, there's a campground in Canada that's
right, a bunch like just kind of pop up every once in a while. Like, the film is actually screening at a nude queer campground in Kingston, Ontario.
Oh, really?
Which is like a big summer thing. And then there's Honcho. Have you heard of Honcho? One of our cast members was like, I love the script. It's like a Honcho nightmare. I'm like, and then I'm like, Oh yeah, Honcho is more of like a music festival in the woods.
Okay.
But everybody is pretty much nude and camping for a few days.
What? Terry, did I tell you about the nude campground near where I filmed?
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
Yes, I do remember that.
In the middle of rural Kentucky,
Kentucky.
Awesome.
It's only men, but it's like gay men, clothing optional, and they actually housed some of our cast for a very low cost, and they were the nicest people ever. And but yeah, they're cool as shit. They just had like a big fence so people, because they were very close to town and people were weird about it, but they were just chilling, just like dudes chilling.
I don't know what it is about taking your clothes off. It just feels good. It's like, it's not... I think it's just a lot of shame around it, but like it starts with skinny dipping, It's just like, ooh, this is exciting. And then it's like, it breaks down walls between friends. And even if you don't see these people as your best friends in life, even sharing that moment with somebody else, it can feel good.
Because ultimately we wear clothes, unless it's really cold out, we wear clothes for modesty, and fashion too is awesome. It's nice to dress up and do all of that stuff. But if you could walk around in a loincloth all day, or if I could, I would, but it might be weird. And then I'd have to have weird conversations, and I might not be able to persuade people to be my friend or do the things I want them to do. Not that I might try to manipulate people, but that's what you're trying to get out of life.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm curious, how did both of you grow up into horror, the thrillers, the kind of scary movies growing up? And if so, how were you introduced?
You go first.
So I grew up around it for sure.
Yeah.
The classic. I mean, I had 2 older brothers and a younger sister, and my mom didn't always let us watch a ton of TV and horror, but my parents got divorced when I was 4. So there were those moments of okay, you've got one parent watching you, and my dad was much more open with stuff. He was kind of we got into the Rambo series way too young, but it was he let us, it was VHS.
What a dad movie though.
Exactly. And it's he there was a few VHS tapes that he just would let us watch. And then it was Revenge of the Nerds, and that whole series, and the classics too. And I think some of the classics were ones that he was less likely to give us permission to watch, which is a little weird. But it wasn't so much, I think, that he was shielding us from violence as much. He didn't want to talk about Scarred for Life. If you show a kid a really scary movie and they're not ready for it, you're going to fuck them up probably. So,
yeah.
So, yeah, I did grow up on it. But I think, what was interesting about joining this podcast today is that, you guys have been doing this for a bit. A lot of the classics have been talked about. And then it was okay, how do we get... What does it mean to be scarred for life? It's I just got so scared of being killed or murdered by Freddy that I'm scarred for life. Or, these other movies that just deal with really deep, dark realities, basically. Violence, yes. Sex, yes. Growing up, becoming exposed to just yeah. And when your parents allow you to do that. And I think because I had 2 older brothers, maybe I did get exposed to some of the dark shit.
How much older were they than you?
One was 1 year older than me, and the other was 4 years older than me. So it's kind of once the oldest one is old enough, it's hard to keep
right.
You kind of get exposed. Did your older brothers help you with that?
I had 2 older brothers as well, and one was 7 and one was 5. So they kind of had their thing. They were, doing their own thing, but they got into more adult themed movies early too, and the 80s are perfect for that. And so I got introduced at a very young age. Hence how I got to see Wizards at a young age, and always thought about it in going into later years until I was actually able to find it as an adult and be like, holy shit, that fucking movie. But, my introduction was through fantasy. My mom used to, when I was a very young kid, the first book that I ever remember coming into contact with was The Hobbit. And, if you think about
I have the Lonely Mountain and Smoke. Awesome. So, yep.
That shit is really heavy for most people. Children aren't necessarily able to like understand the concepts of good and evil and like what the price and the sacrifice people have to make in order to like achieve a modicum of like goodness in the world. And so I went from The Hobbit and you know books like The Faraway Tree, which it's more of an English thing because I grew up in South Africa my first 9 years. Enid Blyton is an amazing author, and she wrote a series of books called The Faraway Tree, where these kids go down into the woods and they climb up the tree and they meet these crazy characters like Moonface and Dame Wash-a-Lot, and then they get to the top, and at the top of the tree every week there's a new world. And there's something like awesome about the exploration and the curiosity of these worlds, but there's also something terrifying about reality not being necessarily like grounded in the here and the now. And so I've always been fascinated by that stuff. And I think like one of the other movies that I like remember from an early childhood watch that really fucking hit me was Space Odyssey, 2001. Like the, you know, the coming into contact with AI for the first time, which is like really, I think the most terrifying thing in the world today. Like you can actually see how it's destroying the fabric of our civilization as a species right here and right now. HAL 9000, HAL 900, HAL 9000, that fucking robot in that ship scared the shit out of me. Cause like we're on a fucking ship floating through the galaxy right now, this planet, and we have a robot that's about to like cut off life support. So it's that shit was scary. And like I'm more into that like psychological, say that again.
How old were you when you saw Space Odyssey for the first time?
I think I must have been like 7 or 8. Like,
holy cow.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Oh, that's a lot for a child. That's a lot. That was a lot for me as an adult to watch for the first time.
I had my brothers introduced me to a lot of shit. Like, you know, I would steal their Hustler magazines and all that. You know, like all of that stuff came from
My dad
I was the older sister with all of the Blu-rays that my brother would steal, and then my parents would be like, "How did he watch this?" They were like, "You bought this?" I said, "Yeah, I bought it at the bookstore." And they were like, "You can't keep buying these movies." So they took away all my movies because my fucking brother was sneaking them out of my room and then quoting them to my parents. I'm like, "You're so bad at this. Like, why are you telling them you watched it?" So bad.
Also, like, our generation is fucking crazy. Our parents were working all the time, and like, you learned what you learned, when you learned it, how you could, and movies were a good way to do it.
I don't know if it's worse now, though, than it was then. I mean, with the internet, that's an even worse exposure, maybe, perhaps.
Yeah, it's a different kind, too, right? Where it's like, I mean, I this comes up a couple times in the podcast, where it's like I lived in Alaska, and there was the woods right behind me, and sometimes you'd stumble across what I would call woods porn. It's like things would just be out in the wild that you would come across in the woods, and now it's like that is gone, but it's just your screen in front of you, and you could find the most depraved and terrifying shit on there.
Yeah.
Birders woods porn.
It really is. Let's just you know, the great marketing, putting it on USBs and putting it in trees around, like, in the woods, and just like a new era of like that is like geocaching or whatever people do.
Geocaching. Totally.
It wasn't too long before some blog took like screenshots of every single nude shot in the entire film and plastered it all over the internet, and it's just starting to pop up everywhere. So yay, you know, bring a little excitement to
thanks lives. I guess for the help market. I don't really know. That's so weird.
I mean, what are you gonna do?
Well, this conversation of is it porn? I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like, is it for your pleasure and shock value, or can you actually make a story about it and it de-porn? Yeah.
Also, porn can be good. If it is porn for someone, good. If not, if they don't want it,
I was going to say, I don't know what's wrong with porn.
Right.
I mean, there are things wrong with porn, like industry, but not porn itself. But like, I own a bunch of porn. I bought a bunch of cool vintage French porn from Altered Innocence. You know, like, whatever.
Yeah, and I think that Altered Innocence, for instance, they're doing amazing things by acquiring and distributing content that just is a little bit, you know, more sexy than a lot of people are used to. And I think that we just thought about that when we were making the movie, because we didn't want nothing against porn, but we didn't want people to label it porn and then that to limit the exposure that the story could get. Yeah. So we just kind of swung in the dark and said, this is where we're going to land. And it's been interesting to see.
And the words,
who open to it and who's like, absolutely not.
Yeah. And the word's more powerful than it should be. Like, ultimately, porn is what it is, but it's too homogeneous. It's like it covers too many different things. And Nate produced a movie in 2017 called Mapplethorpe, and in that movie, it's about an artist who's like as good as it gets, and like amazing talent, and a really like tragic story. It was taken by the AIDS Holocaust, and part of the tragedy of that is, if you think about it, like sex was. We lost so much as a culture when AIDS happened, and it made people really afraid of sex. We grew up in that, and it made gay men just really fearful of expressing love. So, porn or not, sex is not something to be feared.
And maybe that's why we did this story, because that on top of being raised as a Mormon, not just Mormonism, but, if you have religion in your life, there's can be even more shame. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we just want to say, fuck that.
Yeah.
Fuck that. Anyway.
Yeah.
I was like, want to ask what I'll make that. I feel like I can't ask you about horror movies after that. It sounds so insincere. But I mean, like, it is good to have, but I'm so glad we have movies like this, because I didn't have any access to shit like this when I was a kid. I mean, none of us did. Like, and porn or not, whatever, but still, like, this is a movie that's talking about sex in a way that, queer sex, that we don't see ever. And, like, I mean, God, it would have changed my life as a kid to at least know, like, there's some people talking about this stuff. So.
Yeah.
And I hope more people will, like, it's a hard game, because filmmaking is a really difficult business. It's hard to pull off as a business. It's hard to like get the right people together to be successful. And it's hard to find the money to actually do the business. Like, the returns are very difficult to make worth it. You're up against it in indie film as well. And we were very lucky to find an amazing partner, and our money is queer. And she's the awesomest human being, and she's a patron of the arts. And so we're lucky, and we're very grateful for that. But it's one of those things where it's hard to talk about sex, because it's hard to find people that will platform you. And like you're a good person for platforming the arts. And that's a wonderful thing. So thank you.
That's all I can do at this point. I'm like, if I can do something, I can at least uplift queer people as much as I possibly can, because there's not a lot of queer people in the genre space. Well, there are, but there aren't. So we got to help each other. So
it's been a great year for it, I have to say.
Yeah,
great year for it.
It has been a great year for it. It's so cool. There's a lot of really cool, queer, weird shit coming out right now, and it makes me very happy.
And hopefully a lot more. Just
please
keep it coming.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Okay, Ami, before we go into your pick, though, Nate, you had a pick, a Scarred for Life pick that we're not technically doing an episode on, but I do want to hear what it is and why it is before we jump into Ami's pick.
So, it's Better Off Dead, starring John Cusack, and a director who I keep looking up because
Savage
Steve, because I keep Savage. He did a few things. There's so much there, and we rewatched it because it popped into my head as just this movie that just lived with me and my siblings as kids, that we would watch over and over alone, without the parents, and it had adult themes, and it's about a kid in high school who it's a crush on a girl, and she goes for the head of the ski team, and he wants to kill himself because of it. And, that's the simple story. He agrees to race the guy, a big race up in the mountains, in which he's practicing coming, and he just, every time he comes down that mountain, he just gets fucked up. And it's just there's so much in that movie about the dread you feel as a teen. I mean, his parents are fucked up, and the great Vincent Chiavello, is that his name? The guy who plays the school teacher, he's like in every 80s movie. He's just, that. And I just think when you look at a movie that you watch when you're a kid and you're like, it doesn't really hit the same way that it did when it was a kid. But that's just one of those movies that I watch it and I'm like, this makes so much sense. Why, as a kid, we just all kind of like fell into this film every time we put it on, and just the themes of what it feels like to be a teenager dealing with consent and sex. And I mean, it actually resonates a lot with Birder, weirdly, just the style and the tone and certain shots. And it just stuck with me for my life. And I think it just was that moment of like breaking the seal, like, oh, life is tough.
Yeah.
Life is hard.
I was familiar with the title, and I knew it had John Cusack, but I never saw this. And so when that came through, I was like, what is Better Off Dead even about? And so I pulled it up, and I'm reading the IMDb synopsis, and I was like, what the hell? Because it's rated PG, and it seems like a teen comedy. And then the synopsis on IMDb says, after his girlfriend Beth Truss ditches him for a boorish ski jock, sad sack high school student Lane Meyer decides that suicide is the only answer. And I was like, that is a heavy topic for what I thought was just going to be like a cute, John Cusack 80s movie. And so I was like, what is this? And so I sat down and I watched it, and it's a wild movie. I don't think some of it has aged completely well, but it is a wild movie.
Oh no. And some of the, just like we're talking about the 80s, the misogyny and the way they dealt with race. And I think probably I should have had somebody there watching it with me the first time, maybe, just kind of giving some comment. But, like I said, I had my brothers. But yeah, Ricky across the street and the way he kind of just that poor French exchange student and the overbearing mom. It kind of feels sometimes like maybe Lane is there's a lot of drug references in there, and when you're a kid, you don't quite know it. You can feel it, but you don't maybe know exactly what you're feeling, and you're like, something's afoot,
Oh yes. Yeah.
So I hope that you guys enjoyed watching it.
I had never seen it until Nate was like, dude, this movie, and then I saw it and I was like, this is insane. But it also kind of hits on like one of the biggest consent issues that I don't think we talk about in society enough. And like, they got it. Which is, you don't consent to be alive. You're brought into the fucking world and you're stuck with your life, your parents, and it's pretty hard for Lane. And his little brother takes a space shuttle, builds a space shuttle, and fucking flies out of there. It's a wild movie.
It is wild. It's a movie that could only exist from the 80s. I was like, there is so much going on in this movie.
Also, the animation shit that happens, it's a cool fucking movie. Weird. Oh. Like, is he taking drugs and just like the claymation cheeseburgers and hamburgers talking to each other? It's wild.
And the director's name is Savage. I think Savage Steve Holland, and he got the nickname Savage because he kicked some kid's teeth out in like middle school or something.
Apparently, is that why?
I was like reading about it. I was like, but he kept the name. Like it is like professional.
As an adult man,
Savage Steve Holland, and he kicked some kid's teeth in when he was a kid. Like, that's the guy that made the fucking movie.
It said it was based. I read it was based on a true story.
Yeah. It's like horrible. I'm not laughing because it's good. It's horrible.
It's just wild. I can't believe that. Wow.
Why are straight men allowed to make movies? Anyway, sorry. It's just like, you guys thought that guy was the right one. What? Anyway. Oh my God.
It's a good movie. It's wild.
I think my mom showed this to me as a child, and because my mom loved this kind of movie.
There's so much there too that's just weird too. Like the actor that played Ricky. Have you read about the Nickelodeon document? He went on to be an exec writer.
Yeah, Dan Schneider. Yeah, Dan Schneider's in this.
I didn't even put that together.
Fucking weirdo, and that Nickelodeon documentary just came out.
Yeah, and it's
have you seen it? Did you watch it?
He was Ricky.
That's an intense watch.
I had no idea.
I have heard about him because I grew up watching those. I was older than those shows, and my brother is 9 years younger than me, so he grew up watching all those shows. So I was like, my parents and I were always like, these are weird, but whatever. But then I started hearing the Dan Schneider stuff for a while ago, and I was like, nope, absolutely not, fucking terrible. No, thank you.
Yeah, that hit me hard.
Gross.
Oh gosh, that's it.
Gross.
He plays an interesting character in the movie.
Good Lord.
Ricky. Absurd, camp, over the top, just fun to watch, but like you said, doesn't truly problematic in many ways. But
it's a 1980s comedy.
We did it Birder, and I think that we hit on a lot of that stuff in a very different way. That's why it's almost like a satire. And I think that in so many ways, those 80s movies just feed our work.
Hell yeah. All right, well then, Ami, we're going to talk about what movie you brought with you today. What film did you bring today for us to discuss?
I chose Ralph Bakshi's Wizards, which came out in the 70s. And I think 77 or 78.
77.
Yeah, 77. And I saw it when I was probably too young, and it deals with really, really heavy human shit, like Holocaust stuff and apocalypse and good versus evil and Cain, Abel kind of stuff, very deep, eternal human issues. But it's animated. It's this really awesome style of animation, which is hyper-sexualized women. And then men are weird nebusha characters, and there's mutants, and it's this world that I think 6 million or 10 million years after a nuclear apocalypse.
So the brief synopsis real quick is, on a post-apocalyptic Earth, a wizard and his fairy folk comrades fight an evil wizard who's using technology in his bid for conquest. It's from the IMDb summary.
Yeah. So you started to talk about it, but how old were you when you saw this, and how did you see it? Kind of set the stage for why this is your pick and your first viewing of it.
I guess the first time I saw it, I was in Tampa, Florida, and I must have been 8 or 9 around then. My brothers were, we had moved from South Africa, and my parents we were in a new country trying to figure it out. So my parents were busy dealing with their stuff. They get divorced soon after the move because life is fucking hard, and I was the mistake. So it's, the brothers are going to school, and my older brother had a fascination with fantasy, and just like I did, we grew up on that stuff. So he got his hands on these kinds of IPs that were filter into my life, and I used to read the books he would pick up, and these awesome dark fantasy stuff like Elric, and I can go into that. But this movie, I think it was VHS, and I would just watch the shit that was around, and it was probably not with him, but it might have been. I was a precocious kid, so I thought I could handle a lot, like many children are, and I did. It didn't you don't know that it affects you until you think about the movie for years and years and years until you're like, what was that fucking movie I watched, and what was it really about, and how did it inform my life? And I guess now so much of what I think about is the duality of human nature, and how we can be so like empathetic towards each other, and then turn around and just worry about ourselves. And like when you know, just the simple act of someone throwing like a piece of trash out their window in like a neighborhood that they're not from, or even in their own, like the way that humans deal with each other in such weird ways. And this movie like really got me because I'm also an Ashkenazi Jew, and from a family that fled pogroms in Lithuania. So that's part of like my personal heritage and how I was raised. And my mother, you know, she was, you know, that's part of what she passed on to me as a very young person. And you don't really know what Holocaust means or what a swastika really means when you're very young. You really don't even know what it means when you're really old, because none of us know what it's like to watch 6 million people or 50 million people in Russia like face this like war machine, this like creation of madness and just extermination of an order that we haven't seen since World War II, but it could happen again. And that's terrifying. And this movie really talks about it. Like it makes the idea of the cycle of these kinds of things really real. And there's something really scary about the fact that you can face this again tomorrow, or if someone does something crazy, that's it. We're back in the world of machines being used to wipe out millions of people.
Holy shit.
Wow. What you just said kind of, it resonates for why this probably would have terrified you as a kid. But do you remember particularly what about this just was frightening? Is it everything that you just talked about, or was that going over your head?
I think the thing that really lives with me from that movie and always did was the character Necron 99, who is this assassin. It was like the most interesting character, one of the most I've ever encountered, because like he's this fucking assassin that's being used by what's the dark Black Wolf, I think, is the dark wizard.
Yeah.
The two brothers. One's Avatar is a good guy, and they're living for thousands of years. And Black Wolf, and just to set the stage for them, like Black Wolf and Avatar were born from the same mother, and Avatar worships his mother and is loved and gives love and is capable of like giving that love, and so worships her. And Black Wolf, for some reason, can't get that love through. It's this like some block there. So Black Wolf is a mutant and can't love himself, and so he then can't love his mother because his mother gave birth to him, and he's a mutant, and he's like this thing that can never find peace in the world. So again, the consent thing. So Black Wolf turns to darkness, and Black Wolf fights after their mother dies. Black Wolf fights Avatar and loses, and then gets banished into the mutant realms, and then starts to build armies to like come back and have his revenge. And he creates this, I don't know if Necron is, I'm assuming Necron is some kind of robot or like magical creature or an assassin. He's basically like this red, like suit that is filled with a life force that can be both good and evil. And at some point, Avatar kind of turns him to the light side. And then I forgot her name, but the fairy queen that's with Avatar at the time, whose father is murdered by Necron, murders Necron, who's at that time I think is called Peace. He's changed over. But that character who rides this dark like steed, like this two-legged horse-like creature, is really fucking scary because he's got you know, he's brutal, but also he's capable of like knowing it, and like you kind of root for him, but then you're also like deeply afraid of what he can do. And I don't know, like a very striking figure. And I don't think I've seen a lot like him in other people's work. He's a very cool, striking creature.
He really is. I mean, I think there's a reason why he's on like the cover, the poster art of him on his steed. He's probably the image that I think of most. But there's two, him and also just the Avatar with his cigar and smoking it with his feet. Like those are the things that lingered in my head since I saw this as a kid. So I agree 100% particularly with Necron. What a fascinating character.
Fascinating. Yeah. And tragic.
Yeah, very tragic. I'm curious, Nate, did you ever, when did you?
I hadn't watched it until he started talking about it for this. And, it's just a striking work. I was really struck by the style of animation and, with fantasy, it's like a way to talk about things, and almost like the more advanced we get with animation, they seem to look more like real people, but the imagery and the kind of like the black and white, almost like armies where it looks like a silhouette or like a silk screen. And then just how the direct references they make to real life. I mean, it's a fantasy world, but it's just very hard hitting. And I think it's really easy to get to, for it to kind of like get under your skin, because you're looking at this beautiful kind of almost impressionist art and the colors, and I don't know if that's a version that was remastered or something. I mean, it's a long time ago, but yeah, it's just kind of, I was a bit stunned by the time we were midway in. I just thought, wow, they don't make things like this anymore.
Oh, Genndy Tartakovsky does. He's awesome.
Who? I'm sorry.
Genndy Tartakovsky did like Samurai Jack. Yeah.
Okay.
Which is like and I don't want to get off top, but like he's fucking brilliant. And like, have you seen Primal?
He did Primal. I love Primal. Is
brilliant, fucking incredible.
Talk about telling a story with just the image.
Genndy,
yeah. So he did a lot of like Cartoon Network stuff, Terry, for a while, and then he kind of like started doing his own stuff. So Samurai Jack was his, and Primal are the two that he's like super known for, that are like his shows. And
Primal
he's really
is like high art.
It's so good. And it's like, it proves that animation is an incredibly valid medium that is not just for children. And I think, like, unfortunately, we are always fighting that. I've always loved animation. I've always been a big anime person. And I just love, like, the animated Hobbit and Ralph Bakshi's animated Lord of the Rings were, like, on repeat in my house growing up, because I love the Hobbit, which I thought was also Ralph Bakshi until literally right before you guys got here. It was like, oh no, it's not him at all.
Lord of the Rings,
So Lord of the Rings was his. And that was like, I was reading Lord of the Rings at the time, and I was in elementary school because I was also a big fantasy kid. And like, animation has always been such an escape, even now for me. And I love, like, Scavenger's Reign, that was on Max, was like absolutely brilliant. If you haven't watched that one, that one was fucking brilliant.
So good. It's on Netflix now.
Oh, it's on Netflix now, that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone watch it. It's amazing.
It's so good, but it's just like the power of animation and the fact that Ralph Bakshi was doing all this. And I mean, like, there's lots of other contemporary animators, like the guy who did Belladonna of Sadness. If you haven't seen that one's incredible. But it's so interesting seeing, like, in the 70s and 80s what animation was doing, and how that, I feel like, went away a little bit in terms of, like, the more experimental nature of it. And maybe I'm just not as tapped into that part of film right now, which I would love to be more tapped into.
It's technology, right? It's like puppetry, Dark Crystal, and just like Mad Max or Star Wars.
I think there's something really like important there. There is this metaphor in the film that it mirrors to what we're going through now, like both in the arts and like it's I think it's a little too binary in Wizards, and in the rewatch it's very old take on good and evil.
Yeah.
But it is like an important metaphor, like as we gain more technology, like it becomes easier and easier to become the like all the same thing. And in order to be successful in like the arts or in life, you need like the newest iPhone, the best cameras, everything has to be color graded in a specific way. Everything has to sound a specific way. The way you make your movies, the way you tell your stories, the formulas, the technology is making it harder and harder and harder to go in another direction, because quality has become almost objectively scaled. And that makes it really hard to look. And in Wizards, what's really brilliant is like, it talks about like nature and like these fairies, and like they're a little naughty and they're not all nice, and they're like, there's this ability to like go off in the woods and be sexy, and then the other side is like, I guess, spoilers, like they use Nazi propaganda to to start winning this war. Like Black Wolf comes back in, and he uses Nazi imagery and propaganda to like cow his enemies. And I think it's more metaphorical because it's like you don't actually see how it works to cow the magical races, but it is like you get it. It's like it's this overwhelming power of information and data and introducing evil and then using machines to like bring everyone together under his reign. It's like a long-standing metaphor, but it is real. And it's like, I think animation is brilliant for that. And animators like Jendi who can open up new worlds are important. And this story for me was that it was able to talk about a topic which you can't talk to kids about. Like, how do you explain what a Holocaust is? Like, what the Nazis were?
yeah,
right.
How do you talk about that?
Yeah.
And I think that movie did very well. We were looking at like box office, and I don't really know how much you can tell from the number online, but it said that the movie made something like, what was it, 10?
I think like $10 million.
$10 million.
Like $9 million.
In the 70s?
Yeah.
Animation like
77.
that.
It's a lot of money.
That's one of those, like, they exaggerate the numbers for this or that, but to think of how that landed at the time, if that's true, that would be wild.
And it's interesting. I always love when someone comes on the show, Ami, and their introduction was fantasy, because my mom was a big fantasy reader. My dad was a big old school horror, Hammer, Universal Monsters, that era, the 50s, that kind of era of horror. So I had that, and my mom hated horror, but she loved fantasy. And so in the 80s, it was like TSR. Did you ever read any of like the Dungeons & Dragons books? Like Dragonlance was my cup of tea. Tannis, yes, Raceland and Caramon, and yes, all of it. That was my life. Yeah, that was my life. I loved, and I would read those books. I would gobble them up. Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman were my favorite authors at the time, and I would read everything that they would write.
They were awesome.
Yeah. And so that was sort of like, I love fantasy. I love it to this day. But I specifically remember watching this movie because, one, there was a boy that I did not know I had a crush on that loved this movie. And so I was like, yeah, I'll watch this movie with you. It's wizards. And I remember being so distraught watching this film because it's not what I expected at all. He's like, there's a wizard that smokes a cigar with his feet. And like, I was like, what is this?
That's all I told
and so,
you? Oh man,
that is
really
all he told me.
Success there, huh?
A great first statement.
So sexy.
And so I remember specifically sitting down to watch this movie, and the animation was unlike anything I had ever seen before. And I'm like, this is making me uncomfortable because I grew up on Disney movies at the time, and like that was my experience with animation was that. And so I'm watching this and going, this feels very weird. It's very hypersexualized. I was like, on the rewatch, I was like, oh yeah, there's the sex working fairies. Like there's a scene where the fairies are on the street, being sex workers. I'm like, this is wild. And I'm watching this as a kid, and then all of a sudden there's real life footage, and I didn't know what Nazism. I think I was maybe 10 at the time. I didn't know what any of that was, but I was like, we're seeing footage of war, and we're seeing like real life footage in an animation, which blew my mind. I was like, what is this? And then there's the rotoscoping that he used, which I guess in hindsight is because they didn't have the budget to film the big army sequences, so he decided to test this out. But I'm watching this, and I'm like, my 10-year-old brain was just like melting. I'm like, what? I don't understand what this movie is, because it was everything that I did not expect from a fantasy film. It was set in the future, not in some like whimsical past or something. It takes place on Earth that was ravaged by a nuclear holocaust. It's like, this is not what I think of when I think of fantasy. And yes, there is a wizard that smokes a cigar, but what does he do to kill the bad guy? He pulls out a gun and shoots him. I'm like, what? What is this?
It was brilliant.
Yeah, it absolutely is. But as a kid, I was like, I don't know what to think about this. It made me so uncomfortable.
How old were you when you saw it?
Probably 10, I want to say.
I was probably around the same age. I'm right there with you because I think the discomfort of it is actually what the movie is about. Is like getting to like that like play because they're brothers and like the love of their mother and like the violence in it is very real. Like it just even at the beginning where like the scout shoots the steed through the head and with the arrow, and it's like it's real violence, and you're able to associate humanity with these characters. It's very well written. It's like really a clever movie.
Well, and I also like they bring in sexuality enough to kind of disarm you and make you think, oh look, it's the fairies, like you're hanging out in the woods with the cool fairies. And it reminded me of Fern Gully a little bit at times. Like, oh, we're in Fern Gully. And then all of a sudden there's guns and monsters. And I don't understand. And I saw this a couple years ago for the first time. So I was fully an adult, and I had seen, my husband sent me a clip of the end, and he was like, we have to watch this movie. I was like, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. Yeah. And I did get very high to watch it, because I was like, I love Ralph Bakshi. I know what this is like. But I was like, I actually don't know if this was a good idea, because it was actually like much more intense. Like I thought it was going to be way goofier, but I was like, I'm sorry, there's a bunch of swastikas now? Like I was very, again, like incredibly uncomfortable and very unsure about what in the fuck was going on. But again, I love that. But it was very much like, oh, this will be like a fun, like hippy dippy experience. Much different than I was expecting. But in a good way.
Yeah, but like,
holy shit.
It's kind of like if you think about the world at that time, like I think we're almost at Reagan, and the 70s, like homelessness is like unhoused people is starting to become a problem in the country, and for the first time in American history, like the dream is lost, and it's such a like being able to say like, shit is not perfect is an important thing.
It's a dread movie.
Yeah. Like without having to shoot yourself in the head.
Yeah. The thing that I think, because again, the things that stuck in my head since when I saw it as a kid, because this was my first time revisiting it since I was a kid, 10 years old, watching it with someone that I had a crush on. I remember the wizard with the cigar. And I remember Necron. Like, those are the two things that I remembered in particular. And I remember the ending with him shooting his brother with the gun. Like, that is all I remember. And so I'm watching this, and I'm like, this is saying something really interesting about the way in which some things propaganda, but the way in which images can be used without them understanding their purpose. Because we have that on this one side where it's like, he's using Nazi propaganda, and this is millions of years in the future. No one understands. At that time, it was sort of like me as a kid watching it. No one understands what the intent is of this, but they're seeing it, and it is just frying their brains, and it's used as a weapon. And I was thinking about that, and then I was thinking about the scene in which the evil guys go to a church, and they're like, well, we need to have God on your side. And we go into the church, and it is full of like Coca-Cola. There's a Coca-Cola machine, and there's like these religious artifacts, and I'm using that in quotations, are like there's an Oscar and a microphone and peace symbols and bats and baseball gloves. Like, this is all like things that they have accumulated that they've attached meaning to that isn't necessarily the meaning that they were initially with. And so I don't know. I found that kind of duality between using the Nazi propaganda and the swastikas and that imagery combined with them, the priests smacking each other on the butt, thinking that they're doing a religious dance, and the Coca-Cola machine and all of that kind of stuff. It's just, I don't know. It's an interesting duality there. Yeah, no, that's an amazing scene too. Cause like they've kept that shit for like millions of years. Like this is pre-Holocaust stuff. And I think it's, for me, like in rewatching it, like those two things play again, like the Nazi propaganda and then the American shit. Cause at the end, like those two guys are asking the priests to take the prisoners. They're like, we have all these prisoners. We can't handle them. Take them, or we're going to have to figure something else out. And the priests are like, we're going to have to pray. So they start praying, and the guys are like, we've got shit to do because we're in the middle of a war.
So Plan 1, they shoot all the fucking prisoners.
Yeah.
So the priests are too busy praying, and everyone else is like that they're supposed to be helping is getting shot. And then Plan 2 is like they're still playing, so let's blow them the fuck up. So like a very violent kind of anti-theocratic moment, but like poignant.
Yeah. The other moment that I found really funny is Fritz, and I can't remember what the other guy's name is, but Fritz gets killed, and he's like, "They've killed Fritz! They've killed Fritz!"
Fritz.
That whole sequence just made me laugh, and there's moments where the evil guys are like, I don't think I can hurt people anymore. Yeah. Like butterflies and stuff. I don't want to do that. I don't know. It's just there's moments of absolute levity in this that just I think also contributed as a kid to my uncomfortableness with this movie, because I'm like, what am I supposed to think about this? Because it's horrific and there's tons of people dying, and then there's these moments of levity. It's like, what is this?
Well, like that is it. That's actually it. Like, look at the fucking world around you. Are we okay with this? And we are, because we're all still here doing our shit. Like, we're on a podcast right now.
We're on a podcast talking about it while the world's going to shit.
Eating food, like going to restaurants. Some people are in it. Like, there's wars around the world, and there's like tragedy and trauma, and some people are not. But we're all just kind of here doing it, and the world is not fucking heaven. It's not hell. It's just the world. That's it. Like, it is that. That's the levity and the sadness and the trauma. It's too much for a kid.
It is too much for a kid.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Especially when you're raised on like a one thing. Like, it's like, I'm watching this because it's funny. I'm watching this because it's scary. I'm watching this because, it'll make me feel one specific thing as a kid. And this movie, it's like, I don't know how to think. I don't know how to feel about this. Try
doing that when your mother tells you to watch out for Nazis from like a really watch out for those Nazis. She's a good lady. She's awesome. My favorite person ever.
She's trying to protect you, but
exactly.
Oh boy.
No, she's right. You should watch out for fucking Nazis. They're
absolutely
Nazis are bad.
It's unfortunate that we have to in this day and age, but it is true. We have to.
Did your mom or dad know that what the movie was, or was it just a?
I don't think they've ever. I don't. My mom has since passed. I don't think she's ever seen it, and I can't imagine that my father has. I might ask him,
because there are those movies that like your parents know you're watching, and the ones they don't know you're watching.
Yes.
And if you're 10 years old, you're either like you're trying to sneak it in, or
and they're like, haha, you're not so sneaky, but I'll let you think you're sneaky.
I was not lucky enough to have parents that wanted to know what I was watching.
Okay.
For better or for worse.
I mean, I'm alive. I'm here. I'm in my 40s. I'm happy. I have a great partner in life. I'm good.
It's those great movies that, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or whatever,
Or 3 O'Clock High.
Yeah.
3 O'Clock High.
It's
I shouldn't have watched that too. Fucking terrible.
Well, not actually
horrifying
there, but.
Well, do we want to wrap up and give this our rating out of 5? Is there anything else we want to talk about? All right, cool. Terry, you're up first. How many cigar-smoking lizards do you give Wizards?
I think I'm going to give it a 4. There's a lot that I had, I guess, repressed on this rewatch, and I was like, this movie has like been in the back of my mind, and there were scenes I can't even remember now which ones they were, but there were scenes I was like, oh, it's from this movie, and because I again had not seen it since I was maybe 10 years old. What I love about this movie in retrospect is that it's not saying that technology is bad, because as a kid I was thinking binary, it's like it's the magic versus technology. Technology is bad. But at the very end, I wasn't even thinking about this as a kid, because how could I? But at the very end, it is technology that ends up saving the day. And so it's like, it's a more agnostic view of technology than I was expecting a movie from the 70s to kind of be about. And so I don't know. I think this movie is unlike any other movie that I'd ever seen growing up. I still think it is a rare oddity in animation because it blurs the line between animation and live action and rotoscoping. It does all these different techniques to make a movie. And I don't know, the creativity and the passion on display in here just really, really just like energizes me. So I'm gonna give it 4. What about you, Mary Beth?
Wait, before you go, what happened with your crush?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Okay.
Oh my God. Okay. I did see his penis in gym, but that was about it.
Yes.
In the locker. He was doing it as a joke, and I was like, what is this?
Oh, Harry. Oh, sweet baby Harry.
Okay.
What is this?
Wizards work.
Exactly.
Wow.
It wasn't a cigar, but anyway, how many? It's warm in here now. How many cigar-chomping wizards?
I also give it 4. I really, especially for the craft, especially as someone like a guy who really loves animation, it's incredible to see what Bakshi was doing in the 80s and what he was creating. But I also think pushing boundaries with the subjects, like, yeah, now they feel like tales as old as time, but with this medium and in this way, it's cool to not only see it forge new paths, but also join that like kind of tradition and that era of like, oh God, what was the wind blows through the barley or wheat or something? The animated one about the old people dying in the nuclear war.
When the wind blows.
When the wind blows.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jesus. But it's just, and I also love how Avatar actually kind of is not a great guy sometimes. He's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. Like, I actually don't want to do anything to do this. I just want to hang out and let it all go to hell without me having to do anything. And I love having a character like that who's supposed to be our hero, because I think so often we're like, oh, we see the good guy as like Weehawk, the young, cute fairy. But it's Avatar, and he's like a grumpy old man who's like, I don't want to fucking do this, but I'll do it because I have to, but I really don't want to. And that's a breath of fresh air when it comes to characters in fantasy stories. Like, we see so many archetypes in fantasy, so it's cool to see Bakshi working against those archetypes with this story that feels familiar and also like really disarming. So yeah, I'm gonna give it 4. And then Ami and Nate, you have the final word. How many cigar-chomping wizards out of 5 do you give?
I'm going to give it a 4.5.
Okay.
I just thought it was so unique. Like I said, I only watched it this week, and just for what it was, the craft, but also, the script, what they were talking about and how many questions I walked away with. I don't think a lot of movies at the time were really hitting that hard. And then
Apocalypse Now.
Yeah. And then, the craft of the animation, I think it's just like walking through a museum and just, washes over you in a way that we don't see very much with computer animation. I was really, really struck by it. And, I just think for how unique it was, mostly how different it was. We don't see things like that. And everything he's done since then, great, but wow, to see that, was that his first?
I think Wizards is
up there.
Early work.
It was definitely one of his early works. I think.
I think you can tell. I just think it's so it's just brash, I love that.
And I'm going to give it a 5 because this is a seminal work in my history. It's psychologically built into me. I think he's an artist in a world of craftsmen, and I think that what he was able to achieve at a time when just the vocabulary for this kind of stuff was vocabulary for identity and like the haziness between good and evil. Like, it was an important movie. It remains an important movie. It's a piece of art, and I wouldn't stand in judgment beyond saying I love it. It's going to live with me forever.
Hell yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us to talk about Wizards and Better Off Dead. What a wild companion piece. are you guys online? Where can the listeners find you? And the floor is yours to plug it with whatever you guys can talk about or want to plug.
Well, you can find out about our film Burger at Burger Movie on Instagram and on Facebook, and it pretty much has all the links and all the news on there. So, and it just hit video on demand, streaming digital on June 24th. So Apple TV, Google Play, Spectrum, YouTube, all that. It's out there. Go see it.
Yeah. We're working on our next film. We're getting close. We're about to lock the script. It's going to be really fun. It's about the
so
contract
exciting.
bridge. Kind of like, yeah, I'm not even going to do the pitch. But
Same but different.
Hell
yeah, but
Hell
we're so grateful that you had us on to like laugh and chat and shoot
Absolutely.
the shit. Yeah.
That's what we like to just shoot the shit about movies.
Yeah, you're
It's
awesome.
fun.
You guys are great.
But thank you so much. So listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. Did you see Wizards, and what was your experience with it? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter or on social media. I'm at MB on Twitter and at MB.McAndrews on Instagram.
And I'm at Gaily Dreadful everywhere.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter and Blue Sky at Scarred Podcast and on Instagram at Scarred for Life Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. And if you want to help support us, we do have a Patreon.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.